Good day, everybody. Welcome to NTWC Plus. This is our sixth season and the fourth episode today, and this is our Weather Tiger episode. So I think it's going to be fascinating today. What we're going to talk about from our eye wall of experts here to talk tropics. It's always fun. You see Dr. Ryan Truchelut there, and we'll get to Dr. Ryan in just a second to talk about what he's working on right now. Our panel of experts is here as always, but before we get to them, let's thank our sponsors who make this show a reality week in and week out. Couldn't do it without the sponsors, so we'll start with USAA. Thank you, USAA. Oh my goodness, you've been part of our programs from the very beginning. Again, this is the sixth season of NTWC Plus, but National Tropical Weather Conference goes back 14 years, and we've been doing things since even long before that at the Storm Science Network. So thank you, USAA, for being a charter member of what we do. South Padre Island Convention and Visitors Bureau, they're the host of the National Tropical Weather Conference. We're there every year in April. We'll be back there again in April of 2026. Kind of hard to think that we're talking about 2026. The Weather Company, big time sponsor. We appreciate them for all they do. They prepare weather graphics for broadcast outlets around the nation. Weather Boy, they do a sponsorship of scholarships for college students to come to the conference. And Live View, they take care of the broadcast from the conference back to the broadcasters' home stations around the nation. So we couldn't do it without any of those folks. With us today, once again, our extreme weather and disaster scientist, Dr. Hal Needham in Galveston this morning. Little rain where you are this morning, Hal.
Morning, Tim. Heavy rain downpours, claps of thunder, and most importantly, cooler temperatures. It's refreshing on the island this morning, and we'll take it.
Take it when you can get it. We were talking before the show about how, the dew point's down around 70, and it's just delightful out there down here in South Texas. So amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, up here, we're constantly between about 78 and 81. I mean, I looked this morning, I think we dropped to 76, but we're very humid, but we'll take a little bit of refreshment when we get these heavy showers.
Absolutely. Give you a little bit of a break from the summer heat. Hal will be asking lots of good questions today. Thanks for being with us, as always, Hal. We appreciate it. Bill Reed, former director of the Hurricane Center, been riding out storms since before the internet. That was supposed to be a joke, but it's true. It goes back a while. Bill, good morning.
Yeah, probably before single-winged airplanes. But, doing good. We're getting sort of the leftovers from Hal's thunderstorms down there. I'm up about a half an inch so far. It's kind of nice to have what I perceive as typical early summer weather as we roll into June, where we actually get these little disturbances roll in, non-tropical as far as organization, and to give us some rain and hold the temperatures down some. The last several Junes have been brutal, which led into even more brutal July and August. So hopefully we're going to have a different kind of summer here than the last few.
That's the way it's setting up down here, too. We had 3.5 inches of rain about 3 miles from where I'm sitting right now. Yesterday, that had a tenth of an inch here, but those afternoon tropical downpours are kind of nice. So all right, we'll get to that in a second. We'll do your tropical update in just a bit, and Hal's GeoTrack update. But Bill, let's get started. Introduce our guest, please.
Okay, well, it's my pleasure to introduce our guest. We first had you on, I guess last year was our first thing, and then you joined us at our conference this year, and I guess you like what we do because you were willing to come back and get brutalized by Hal and Tim, not me, on our show this year. So Dr. Ryan Truchelut is a co-founder, president, and chief meteorologist at Weather Tiger. He has a PhD in meteorology from Florida State University and a geosciences degree, summa cum laude, from Princeton. He blends academic rigor with real-world forecasting prowess. Over more than a decade, Ryan has delivered mission-critical guidance on tropical cyclones and mid to long-range weather impacts, primarily for agriculture, commodities, and extreme event risk management. His insights have earned him prestigious honors like NASA's Earth Science Enterprise Fellowship and the AMS's Max Mayfield Award. A trusted voice in media and scientific circles, Dr. Truchelut also engages readers of Bloomberg, The Washington Post, and USA Today through Weather Tiger's concise, expert-driven analysis. So, Ryan, good morning.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
I hope you're enjoying a slow start to the season on our side of the pond, but wow, the Eastern Pacific. I don't know how much you deal in your business with impacts from that, but once again, we had a very impactful but small strong hurricane hit a rare hit for the southern coast of Mexico. What's going on there?
Well, yeah, it's been a very slow start to the hurricane season on the Atlantic side, which is great because that means that as I'm writing my newsletters, I can be loose and have some fun and teach my readers about some of the basics of tropical meteorology and not be all spun up about any kind of threat or landfall risk anytime in the near future. But of course, that's not the case on the Eastern Pacific side of the coin, where notched a record fast start. Hurricane Eric, of course, last week was the earliest fifth named storm in the Eastern Pacific of all time. Of course, all time in the Eastern Pacific really only goes back to about the early 1970s for the start of satellite coverage in that basin. But of course, over that time, we really don't see any other early season hurricanes like Eric. It intensified rapidly to a Category 4. Intensity came down just slightly to high-end Category 3 as it made landfall in eastern portions of Oaxaca. Fortunately, in a relatively unpopulated part of that state. But yeah, I mean, there's just not any. If you look at the other early season Category 3s and Category 4s in the Eastern Pacific, they're all well south and west of where Eric formed and where it moved. There hasn't been another rapidly intensifying storm early in the season that's turned north towards southern Mexico like that.
Mm-hmm. My kind of guess was that to me, it seems like it's extremely warmer ocean temperatures immediately south of the coast of Mexico for this time of year, that maybe that's playing a role in the spin up of these early season storms in that same general area.
Sure. I think that that's playing a role. If you look further south in the Eastern Pacific, sea surface temperatures are pretty close to normal, but you do have that warmer band close in on the coast. I think another major player here in dealing out where the early season tropical cyclones are forming are these big patterns of where is upper level convergence and where is upper level divergence happening. When you have upper level divergence, winds spreading out way in the upper atmosphere 7 or 8 miles up, that tends to promote convection and thunderstorm activity. And all that upper level divergence has been really centered over the Eastern Pacific over the last 4 to 6 weeks. So that promotes tropical cyclone formation. Convection is, of course, the building block of the tropical cyclone. On the other side of the coin in the Atlantic, we're getting dinged by upper level convergence. So we're having anomalously sinking air over the Western Atlantic, Central Atlantic. That's keeping the kibosh on convection. There's really been very little convection at all across the Gulf, Caribbean, or tropical Atlantic over the last 2 or 3 weeks. Not only are we getting that upper level subsidence, upper level convergence, but we're also seeing outflow from hurricanes in the Pacific like Eric spreading over all that air that goes, in, up, and out, as we say in tropical meteorology. That air has to go somewhere. And as it's getting evacuated out the top of hurricanes like Eric, it's spreading out over the Caribbean and the Gulf. And it's brought some very unfavorable wind shear conditions to the Western Atlantic. So that's great because, the place we watch in June for potential U.S. impacts, we watch the Gulf, we watch the Western Caribbean, and we watch that kind of pocket of the Gulf Stream east of Florida, south of the Carolinas. Conditions have been pretty unfavorable in that band since then, really since the start of the hurricane season.
Good. Yeah. Other aspects of the Atlantic that I get questions on that maybe you could add some expertise to. Do you have some thoughts on the rather dramatic cooling that's gone on in the main development region of the sea surface compared to the last couple of seasons?
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, in June, while you wouldn't really expect there to be a preponderance of our development threats to be east of the Antilles, it is a place that in the last few years we have had to watch. Of course, Beryl, a very early season Eastern MDR developer, we had 2 MDR storms in June in 2023. And 2023 and 2024, those SSTs in the main development region were so far beyond any other year in the historical record that, in 2023, we were able to fight through the negative influence of an El Nino event. And in 2024, we got off to an incredibly fast start with the strongest June hurricane of all time. One of the only 2 July category 5s in recent history with Beryl. We're not going to see that. I think there's much lower odds of that happening in 2025 because those sea surface temperatures have cooled quite a bit, particularly in the eastern main development region between the Lesser Antilles and West Africa. So what's going on out there? Well, in general, we've seen stronger than normal subtropical ridging to the north of the main development region. And because of that, we have faster east to west low-level trade winds than normal. And when those trade winds are blowing faster than average, a couple things happen. One, those quick winds are able to pick up lots of dust and sand from the Sahara Desert. And that dust and sand, of course, rolls from east to west across the Atlantic, which is highly unfavorable for tropical cyclone development. It also blots out the sun to some extent over the MDR. So less sunlight getting down to the surface means that we've had the ability to kind of cool, or at least have a less anomalously warm MDR over the past 3 or 4 weeks. And of course, just those stronger winds at the low levels themselves have, they essentially cause higher evaporation off the surface of the water. And evaporation, like sweat cools your skin. Evaporation off the surface of the Eastern Atlantic cools the surface of the Eastern Atlantic. So we have seen a downturn in those sea surface temperatures, thankfully. I do think trade winds are going to slacken a bit going into early July. So we may give back some of those gains here over the next 2 or 3 weeks. But I'd much rather be where we are in 2025, even knowing that there's some warming in the pike versus where we were in 2023 and 2024, which was downright scary.
Yeah, I guess from if I understand what you talked about correctly there, these kind of the features of the stronger winds and the dust are impacting probably a fairly shallow layer, since it doesn't mix cooler water, doesn't change the conditions subsurface all that much.
Yes, that's very true, which is why we're set up to rebound potentially once those trade winds slacken here coming up. So I certainly wouldn't write off the 2025 hurricane season at this stage. There's no scientific basis to do that, unfortunately. I'd like to, but can't be done.
It's pretty easy sell over here. I start with Felicia in '83, didn't first storm up August. And if that doesn't excite people, I say, by the way, the 1900 storm that made landfall on September 8th was the first storm up for the year. And there are other examples in Texas of the A storm being fairly late in the year and in being impactful for us.
Sure. I mean, Andrew's an obvious example from Florida.
Yeah.
Of course, there was an unnamed early season storm that just, Andrew was actually the second storm of the year. The first one just didn't get a name, but I mean, 1900, who knows? There may have been, Andreas out there that we didn't know about.
Right. Oh, I'm sure there were. I mean, the odds of a ship encountering and making good notes of something that hit and miss back in the day, I think, are pretty low.
Oh yeah, pretty negligible, since it wasn't even in a shipping lane or anything like that. Really, in no man's land east of Bermuda.
Yeah. I used to catch a lot of grief from people when we were naming those storms, and I remind them that until we had satellites and better able to detect there, one of our greatest losses in hurricane season was sinking ships. It's important to note those storms. So the forecasting things like sea surface temperature, since you do some medium to long range forecasting, is there much skill in forecasting how the sea surface temperature in the tropics will evolve, say, over a 1 to 4 month period?
Sure. Well, there is some, and really the region where you want to look right now is more in the Canary Current region. So kind of northwest of the North African coast, kind of in the west of Spain, west of the UK region. That area has a very strong correlation in June with sea surface temperatures in the main development region in August and September. So it actually even has a stronger relationship than the current temperatures over the MDR itself. That has some information kind of embedded in it about the trade wind pattern going into July and August. Now, as you roll into July and you go into August, you get more predictability from the MDR itself. But right now, the Canary Current region is very warm, and that's, I think, a good hint that we'll be anomalously warming the MDR at least somewhat over the next couple months.
Yeah, yeah. And then further west in the Western Caribbean and Gulf, it's still warmer than normal. And even if it was just normal, it's certainly adequate to support major hurricanes from now on in.
Certainly is. If you have favorable atmospheric conditions, the sky is the limit.
Yeah. Speaking of the sky of the limit, I'm hogging the show here. Hal, jump right in there with some questions.
Ryan, this process of a strong subtropical high with a steeper pressure gradient, stronger winds across the Sahara, more dust going over the MDR, would this be typically a pattern we see more like in, say, the early part of the hurricane season, like June, July, as opposed to August, September?
Yeah, the climatological peak of the Saharan air layer SAL outbreaks is really in July, and then we start to trail off with that SAL outbreak frequency going into early August. So, we are really in a pattern between late June, early August. This is not an atypical pattern whatsoever. July is kind of a transitional month in hurricane season climatology. I kind of like to think of hurricane season as actually, at least from a U.S. landfall risk perspective, 3 almost separate seasons with different regions of development, different mechanisms of development. In June, you get Central American gyre circulations developing into storms over the Caribbean, over the Gulf. You get old fronts that stall out over the Gulf Stream and spin up. But it's really not, climatologically until you get into late July and August that you have the classic African easterly wave mode of genesis becomes dominant. So yeah, this is not unusual. I mean, it's reflective of the typical TC climatology that we've built over the past 125 years.
Ryan, you were talking about with the East Pac being so warm, we're seeing maybe more surface level convergence. Like you said, the air is coming in, up, and out. And then you mentioned some of the thunderstorms actually crossing over Central America, the Yucatan Peninsula, getting into the Caribbean, Western Atlantic, and producing more wind shear. So is there a climatology to show when the East Pac tends to get more active that the Atlantic might actually get less active? How do we connect those two ideas?
Sure. Well, if we look at Atlantic and Eastern Pacific hurricane seasons as a whole, and we look at the total accumulated cyclone energy, or ACE, that of course reflects storm intensity times time, there is a trade-off between overall seasonal activity in the Eastern Pacific and in the Atlantic basin. I mean, a lot of that just simply reflects El Nino or La Nina, El Nino being more conducive to East Pac development, higher